All right, yes, Happy New Year and welcome to our first combined working group meeting of 2025. We're starting the year with a lot of documents still in review section. So if you're regularly with us, you have one of two tasks. If one of these documents belongs to you, please make sure that it's up to date, that it is still in fact in review. We should be having more people look at it. If the documents don't belong to you, then click through and have a look at anything you think you might have an opinion on. Have a look at these designs. These should make up the agenda for this meeting over the coming weeks as we try to move these designs forward or decide that maybe we need to take a different path. That being said, for today, it looks like Ben has the first item on the agenda with data plane and control plane charts.
Yeah. So this is the continuation. If you open the PR, you can see the examples, or whoever's sharing, of the ambient wrapper chart. So for context, we created, because people were struggling with installing Istio via Helm, because we have, like potentially up to 5 different charts that you have to install in order in our Helm install docs. People were basically writing their own wrappers or doing wrappers or whatever else, or asking for wrappers. So we created one for ambient that basically rolls all 5 charts into one chart to install as a unit and thus upgrade as a unit. And the concern was, at that point from the talk, was that, okay, well, we don't want to tell people to install all 5 of these things as a unit together and upgrade them as a unit, because some of these, specifically the Istio CNI daemon set and Z-tunnel, have different upgrade cadences that we don't want to encourage people to treat them the same as Istio D or whatever else. So this is an attempt to split all those 5 charts into 2 groups and wrap them like this, basically. So we have a data plane chart, which contains the Z-tunnel and the CNI. Optionally the Z-tunnel. If you're just installing the CNI for sidecars, it will skip the Z-tunnel. And then a control plane chart, which has everything else. And those, as far as I've identified, are the two groups of cadences that we need to care about for upgrades. There's the things that belong to the data plane and have a different upgrade cadence because they might be disruptive to the node or whatever. Those are all in the data plane chart, and the control plane chart, which is all the other stuff. This doesn't include stuff like the gateway chart, because I think we should probably deprecate that to begin with. I don't really see that as fitting in, because typically we are using we want people to use gateway API, and those are managed with controllers, so we don't really need a chart for that. But basically, it's just saying that, okay, the ambient chart was everything in one, which was not granular enough. 5 is too granular. Here's 2, which is the least grouping I can do that will meet the TOC's requirements of, we don't want to put these 2 different kinds of things in the same upgrade cadence. So you can upgrade these individually now in whatever order you want. So we're down from 5 to 2 in wrapper charts here. These will work for ambient or sidecar. And I'm asking if we should document these, because we have published that ambient chart and people are using it. We haven't documented it because we don't want to encourage people to use that upgrade cadence. So this is sort of like try 2. Maybe we could document this and encourage people to use this, and then we can drop the ambient chart wrapper chart or whatever else. And for people that don't know, this is Helm chart composition. So those 5 charts are simply composed into a larger chart that is installed as a unit. If you don't like this grouping, those 5 charts, you can still go install them in any order you want. It doesn't preclude that. This is just a convenience for people following our install guides. Stuff like Argo, where it's really painful to like wrangle with like a bunch of different charts. So yeah, that's the status. Just wanted to see if there's any opposition to including these and documenting them and replacing and dropping the ambient wrapper chart, which we have decided we don't want to do. We don't want to push people towards. Or if we just don't want to do any of these, we drop all of them, whatever else. But I think this makes sense. People have asked for this repeatedly, and I don't like having to tell people that, yes, we have that sample ambient chart, but please don't use it. It's not recommended. So this is an attempt to have something that we can recommend.
Ben, I have a question. When you say recommended, does that mean that this would be suitable for a production utilization?
It should be. Yeah, it solves the upgrade problem that made the ambient wrapper chart not suitable as per the talk. Yes. So okay. Unless there's a new criteria that I'm not aware of for being production recommendable, this should do it.
And then the intent would be to add docs tests to this that we're missing for the other chart as well?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I'm not sure why it meets the production recommendations because we require CNI to be upgraded first today, and we also recommend revisions, and this doesn't support either of those as far as I know.
I believe it does. Well, also we have two different ways to. So if revisions are a criteria, I'll look at that. Our docs do mention revisions as one mechanism, and then they have non-revisions as another. I'll check. It should support revisions. There's no reason why it shouldn't. Like
it can't because the whole reason for base was that it's a singleton. So now you've tied a singleton to Istio control plane, which is multiple if you have revisions. So now in order to fix that, you need to split it back out, and now you're back at square one.
I think we can install it. I think we could. I don't think that's the case because I think the only thing we can still have the chart be a singleton. It will just be replaced in place, which should be fine.
How can you have two revisions of Istio D with one Istio control plane chart?
Oh, we don't, right? Today you install base once, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to change revisions, you have to reinstall it with a different flag, and then you reinstall Istio D.
Most importantly, though, you have two Istio D charts installed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how can you have, if you have two Istio control plane charts, or do you have one? I don't get how you can have a singleton and a non-singleton in one chart and have that somehow work.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll go check that. I didn't think about revisions, and I'll go and account for that and look at that and see if that works. I think there's a way to make it work, but that's a good call. I didn't account for that. So I'll go check that as the next thing. Okay.
Yeah, the other thing too, the CNI versus Z-tunnel upgrade order. I think today we say you have to do one first, which I believe is CNI. Obviously that's in our, we could just decide to not do that.
Yeah.
But we need to be cognizant of that when we do upgrades. Like in the past,
yeah.
I mean, we did it broken anyways, but like that DNS thing, for example, like the thing was like, oh, CNI will upgrade first. It will have this new rule, and then Z-tunnel will make use of it. So if we're saying the opposite, we need to be very careful when we make any changes to Z-tunnel.
Yeah, if there should not be an ordering dependence there. If there is, that is a bug. Basically, we should treat it as such. The order shouldn't matter. You should be able to install one then the other, or the other than the one, and upgrade them in the same way. But yeah, that's something we do need to check. But I do want that to be consistent, which is another reason I want to do this, because that sort of elides that problem.
I don't know why it elides it. It just makes it so we have to make it so that it.
Yes, that's what I mean by eliding. It elides it for the user, so they don't have to worry about it. But we have to.
Sure, I mean, we could have done that regard. Like we could say today we're not changing the charts, but we're also going to make it so that you can upgrade.
Right, I know, but this is more like, you know, it has to work. It has. We have to make it work for this to work, and we have to keep it working and can't break it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. Like I don't want the user to have to worry about that. We should support either way, and this sort of ensures that we have to.
Keith?
Okay, but I'll take the thing to go look at the revisions. That's a good call. I didn't think about that, or if I did, I forgot about it. I'll go check that. That's all I got.
Yeah, so for the base chart problem, which I think is coupled to the revisions problem, I want to ask a more general question. Do we feel like it's still useful to cut 5 charts down to 3? Is that still a net positive? Is it useful enough?
It's a bit egregious to say that we're cutting down the gateway chart by just saying that don't use the gateway chart anymore. We're not really cutting that down. So let's be realistic here and say 4 to 3.
I would also say that I would not want to do this if we were stuck with a minimum of 3. I think 2 is like the if we can't do 2, I don't want to do it, basically is what I'm saying. So I'm going to go and try to figure that out. And if we can't, then I'll drop it because I don't want to. I think 3 is still too many. I don't think the base chart. I personally don't think the base chart needs to be a singleton, and I've talked about this in other issues. There are ways it would be pretty simple to not have it be a singleton, but it is right now. So, and I wouldn't want to have a scenario where we're saying install base, install data plane, install what. That's still too many. 3 is too many. 2 is pushing it. 1 is ideal. But 2 is the if I can get it down to 2, I'm just not going to do it, basically.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. What's the threshold for complexity that we're willing to make here? So I'm glad to have that clarified. The thing I'll say about the base singleton from a chart perspective is I think what's going to get you with the default revision right now. Well, actually no, you said it ahead of time. So ignore me, everyone.
Yeah, we've talked about this already. I think the main thing is the idea that we have one service account resource, which is not revisioned. And that one resource in the base chart is the only thing that forces it to be a singleton. And that could be revisioned itself, but it just would require a little bit extra work to fix that.
And the CRDs.
And the CRDs, but those are typically not revisions.
Yeah, but you can't have two. Like, you have to have one, right?
Yes.
Right. So, how do you solve that problem if they're part of the chart that you install multiple of?
Yeah, we would probably have to split out some of those into different bits.
But
So
then we're
that's
back at the
a-
base chart.
Yeah, exactly.
It depends on how we manage the CRDs. But anyway, I'll take a look at it and let's see if I can figure it out.
We went through this exercise once before and we didn't reach a different conclusion.
Yep, fair enough. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If I can't get it to work with revisions, I'll drop it.
So one thing to look at while you've got revisions in mind then is, I think if you're not using revisions, when you upgrade the control plane chart, all of your waypoints will upgrade. Does that sound right to you?
I believe so. It depends on how you install them. But yes, if you install them the way we prefer to document them, I believe that's the case.
So that would be one thing to look at in terms of just making it more intuitive for the user. I suspect that would be pretty surprising.
Yeah, well, that's sort of unavoidable if we control them with a controller, which is part of the control plane. That's just kind of how it goes.
I think we could, I'd be happy to chat with you offline. I think we have some options. We control the template that does the creation of all of the, things that represent a waypoint from service to service account to deployment, etc. So we potentially could have an
Move it
older
out,
template against the newer control plane.
Yep.
Or vice versa. There are some levers that we have if that would make this work. I would hate for that to be the last blocking issue for this. And I don't think it needs to be.
If I run into that, I'll reach out. And I think that might make sense to do ultimately anyway, regardless of this. But yeah.
Sounds good. Sorry, I think I jumped in front of you, Lynn.
Oh, no worries. I was going to ask, is there a need for this for sidecar? I understand the user actually did complain we have too many chats for ambient, but for sidecar, I almost feel like I don't want any change if nobody complain about it.
Well, again, you don't have to do this if you don't want it to. You can. This doesn't change anything for people doing what they're already doing.
But are we adding another thing for people to learn and use where people already complain Istio install is very complex today?
No, we're just saying that if they go and they say, oh, these are too many charts to deal with, then here's another option. If they don't say that today, then they don't have to.
I want to add another option, particularly for sidecar, and then also
right. I agree. As far as documentation, I agree. I'm not saying I want a third document for how to install Istio. But I will say that even with sidecars, if for instance you use Istio CNI, it's still quite a few charts. It really depends on what you're doing, especially with sidecar. With ambient, it's a little easier because you're always going to have X number of charts as a base no matter what. With sidecar, there's like if you may or may not use Istio CNI, and if you are, that's another chart. You may or may not use some of these other things, and it kind of depends. So I agree for that. It's depending on what you're doing with sidecar, you may not want to do it. But I mean, we have people that have said for sidecar, mostly for ambient, but sidecar is functionally using the same charts. These are too many charts. I don't want to have to do this, and it isn't really a great UX to throw people in front of.
So I think for sidecar, I think people on the call probably would agree. We don't hear much complaint about too many chats because there's not that many, right? And for ambient, we do have some limited complaints. But the other question I'm very worried about design this is at the end, we're going to have the question is, where are we going to surface this? Are we going to surface this for the user, right? If you recall the ambient umbrella chat, we spent like many hours of meeting trying to figure out where does that fit? Can we have an automated test? Is this something we're going to expose to our user?
Yeah.
So
that's what I'm asking. And the reason we argued over the ambient chart was because of the upgrade issue, which this is attempting to solve, so that therefore we can just document this And then it becomes pretty easy to just say for ambient, you install these 2 charts. And then
So your goal is actually have this to replace the existing ambient
5
install
chart guide, yes.
for ham charts. Okay, I was trying to understand your goal, but
Yes.
I certainly don't agree with the goal for sidecar because I'd rather not change in the sidecar.
That's fine. I'm less concerned about that because, as you say, it's a little bit depend. It can creep up, but it's less of a concern than ambient at this point.
Okay, but for ambient, I think we need to establish criteria if what criteria needs to be met, right? So first is the upgrade issue, second is the revision, what people are using revision, and the third is the sequence. Is this in the right sequence where we recommend people to install these different components? I'm not sure if there's any other. I just want to make sure.
I think those are the 3. Those are the 3. The
Okay.
first one should be addressed. The first one should already be addressed here. The second one I'm going to look at. The third one about order. Again, my take is that there is no recommended order, and customers or / users shouldn't have to worry about that. We built the CNI and Z-tunnel interdependency loose on purpose. And if we then go and say, well, they're very tightly coupled to the point where you have to gingerly upgrade one in the right order versus the other, then so far everything where that has been the case has been a bug that we should fix generally for robustness sake. So I don't think we should introduce a constraint that people must upgrade them in a specific order. To me, that feels like we should just fix that so that it doesn't matter, which was the original design goal. So
yeah, I'm not sure if there's an order. So first, we are a small project with limited resource. I don't know if we can afford to have all the ordering and support everything. I think I'd rather be prescriptive as a user and also as a maintainer because we don't have limited resources to support every single
I get that. The
we just
problem
need
is
to tell people
Yeah.
this is what we support and make sure that's really well tested.
the problem with that is that any order we prescribe for installation, because we are trying to avoid a bug, is going to hide a bug that will occur in a real cluster when workloads are recycled in some order that we don't control, right? There is no installation order bug that is not potentially some pod dies in the cluster and restarts in a different order bug. They're the same thing, right? So I don't want to necessarily just say, oh, well, we're going to only test an install order, only test a recycle order, and then something breaks in somebody's cluster because things will, pop in and out in a different order because we didn't test that, right? I don't want to be that prescriptive because I think that's not particularly healthy. We're masking bugs by doing that. It's not hard to test installing CNI then Z-tunnel then CNI, making sure it's healthy both ways. That's something we should minimally do, especially since we've got this whole client server gRPC announce thing where they're talking, right? That should be resilient to either method, right? Or we shouldn't have that. All that machinery is a waste of time if we're just going to say it has to be so tightly coupled that we can't rely on that to be resilient in the cluster. That's the thing that I don't like. That doesn't seem like a good way to do it. And we are already testing a lot of stuff around that. It's not a lot of effort to add another test that just installs them in a different order. So that I don't think is a particularly big concern. That's not a lot of effort to do. And we should just do that because we will have people hit that bug in production if we don't.
I will let other people weigh in for their thoughts. John, I think you're up next.
Yeah, I disagree on the upgrade stuff, but I don't want to get too far off the rails. My biggest concern is I think mirroring what Lynn said is the choice. If we take something complex and then we add something simple, we haven't simplified the system. We've made it more complex. It doesn't matter how simple you make it if you haven't removed the complexity. So I just don't, there's no path here of getting rid of the complexity. You're saying we're adding more choices. That's harmful to users in general because they get to the install page and it's oh my God, what do I pick? Ambient sidecars, Helm Istio Cuddle, Helm 1, Helm 2, a different Helm. It's just overwhelming. And I don't see, I don't know. It just feels.
They already get to the page and they've told us they feel overwhelmed by the number of charts, and they're literally asking us to use something that we can't tell them to use. So either we have to tell them, again, this gets back to, maybe I'll bring this back up in the talk, but we can't keep giving them a sample that we don't recommend because we don't want to fix the problem that they're asking us to fix. That's a really gross catch-22 for users, and maybe we need to educate them that they really should be okay with installing 5 separate charts more effectively, but like we're not doing that and they don't like it. So the other thing too, like the complexity, I agree. You can't hide, you can't make complexity go away, but by wrapping it like this and testing it, you can minimize the concern around it. Like complexity is a problem if you don't test it. And if you've only got an install mechanism that exercises one order of things and one flow of things, it's going to be more fragile than something that exercises it in more ways and doesn't have as many opinions about the particular fragile order in which things must happen. So part of why I want to do this is because it forces us to get a little more hygienic about how we assume things will be installed, because we can't make as many assumptions as we used to, that people are going to install these 5 charts in this exact order, and that if they do it out of order, everything breaks, right? Like a lot of that is just fragility we don't need. And the way to get rid of it is to automate it such that we can test it and know that stuff doesn't break when we do it. Permutations are hard to test, Costin, yes, but having permutations that you don't test is not really an acceptable alternative.
Yes, but I think so let me start by saying I also believe that we can simplify things. I don't think we have to have CNI and Z-tunnel in separate charts. I think we can have the base chart even, which is a singleton, include Z-tunnel and CNI, which are also singletons. So not data plane versus something else, but singletons versus things that can have multiple instances. Waypoints, control planes can have multiple revisions at the same time on a permanent or long-term basis, where, I mean, Z-tunnel is not really revision because at one moment in one particular, it's not a revision in the same sense as a gateway or as a Istio control plane. You cannot have long-term, 2 versions of Z-tunnel long-term on the same node. And it's not something that's not a state that we necessarily need.
Yeah.
Long term,
Yeah.
having 2 versions of a waypoint, for example, or a gateway for 6 months, having the old version along with the new one is perfectly fine. Having
Right.
Istio for 3 months is no problem. Z-tunnel keeping 2 versions at the same time, it's a weird situation. So I think Z-tunnel CNI are upgrade. And the CRD is the same situation. I mean, you cannot really have 2 CRDs at the same time. So having one chart with the 3, I'm all for it, and it doesn't address Lynn comment as well, because sidecar users will just install the base and will install the Istio chart. That's it. They just have 2 charts.
Yeah, and this is like, that's kind of what this grouping does, right? It groups CNI and Z-tunnel into one, functionally one chart. They're still separate under the hood if you want to manually go and install them individually. But it for the user, that's what I'm trying to do. So I think Keith mentioned this. I think Z-tunnel does have some revision dependency, and base does too, which would make it kind of tricky to put all 3 together. But I agree. Like when I go look, I'll look at that, because I agree that would also work for me, right? To have base CNI Z-tunnel one, and then the other one's everything else. That also
I think
works
you are
for me.
hearing agree, but there is also disagree here, because I agree with Lynn that we don't, and with John actually, that we don't need to have additional choices. So if you add an option to Istio base to also install CNI and Z-tunnel, so it's just, you have the old chart, it works with both sidecars and work with Z-tunnel, and it has an option saying composite. And inside the chart, the single chart, it also has the containers for Z-tunnel and for that's easy. It's not backward incompatible. It's the same choices. We have the same number of charts, and it also has the benefit that the user of regular sidecar will also get Z-tunnel for free, and they can migrate. It opens some paths. It's not a new choice.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. I want to do the composite chart as the only choice. I don't want to document the individual charts anymore. They will still be there. We will publish them. Vendors, for instance, could recombinate them into whatever other things they want. But as far as Istio.io documentation, I want to say the composite charts are how you install this. And anyone who knows Helm can go look and see that there are the individual component charts, which they will still pull, they will still install, and vendors and people using them will not be disrupted. But we don't have to document that anymore. We can just document the composite as the way, if we get to a point where we have a composite chart we all like.
That's one way to implement it. The other way to implement it is to add the pods to the base chart and not have a composite chart.
That I get that, but that would be, I think, more disruptive for people already using the composite, the individual charts, than doing the composite. The composite is strictly forward compatible, because if you aren't using it, you can continue to not use it, and we don't break or change your existing charts. But
that's the part I disagree with.
Either way, we got to solve the revision thing, and I think for your thing around the rolling the base in there, that could be an option. But I think Z-tunnel still wants a revision, so yeah, I'll look at that. Revisions are all tied up in this. I'll have to figure out how to de-entangle that because I haven't checked that. All right, that's it.
Keith, did you have something to add there?
I don't think so. Most of it's already been said.
All right. Well, in that case, I think our next item on the agenda actually belongs to you, Keith.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, I've been getting a couple of pings on with questions around customizing Kate's gateways, and just wanted to sort of bring this back around. I mentioned we talked about it a few months ago, and I think what I'm hoping to do aligns with what we discussed before, but wanted to run it by folks again. So I'm thinking for folks who want more customization around their gateways, then they still want Istio to manage them. That being the key thing. Users that I've talked to know about sort of self-managed gateways, but don't want to have to, for example, update their service resource every time they add a new listener. So they want Istio to manage the automatic generation of the gateways. What we could do is we could implement the parameters graph GEP for gateway customization. What I'm thinking might work pretty well is to, and I've put some of these details in the issue that I linked. I think what might work well is to create a config map and then have different keys for different resources. So like a key for the service specifics, key for the key in the config map for the deployment, and then perhaps even a key for, say, proxy config. And then we just try to marshal that into the appropriate pod spec, service spec, proxy config spec resource, and then users can reference that from the gateway for customizations. The config map approach is to sort of address some of the concerns that we had about a new CRD. And having that CRD essentially mirror the Kubernetes pod spec forever. So just wanted to see if that seems acceptable to folks, if there are any other concerns. Yeah, just sort of get feedback.
Keep ask on the chat, is per namespace, no?
Right. So the users could literally create a config map per gateway if they have multiple gateways in namespace that refer to a config map by name in the gateway resource. And my understanding, we implement it as such that that particular config map is parsed and the gateway resources are created in the background.
Yeah, John, sorry, let me I like the idea. Keep in mind there is another config map with root certificates and other things, and there are some discussions about adding more stuff to that. But we already have a config map. We can have two config maps. We can have kind of the controller just let user add properties to this config maps that we already have, that we already mount, or either way. I'm happy with it. I think it's a light approach, and it's that's what config maps are supposed to do, to specify configs. So I'm okay.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, sorry, I lost the tab. So overall, I think it makes sense. The one thing I'm wondering is if we want like default values as well. Like, do we want gateway class to also be able to reference maybe a config map in an Istio system, or like defaults, and then we do the merging?
Yeah, I thought about that. I think the correct answer is probably it'll be a bit more work, but UX ergonomically probably makes sense. And then the more specific gateways would win out. I think setting that up, I actually think that using the current config map might hurt that cost, because if you had, let's say, 3 individual gateways and you wanted 2 to have different config than the first one, which just inherited, and the first one just inherited the default config, then you would need the user to be able to reference a specific config map that they create and that they own.
It's not exclusive. It's not exclusive. I mean, you can have, the default config maps that we already mount on all sidecars
Sure.
and gateways and as the defaults. And you can create a second one, which you use specifically for that gateway, maybe with the same name with the gateway, so you don't have too many configurations. It's basically, if you find a config with the exact same name as the deployment, you mount it optionally, and then you mount the default one, and you merge it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Keith, does your proposed solution look like one of these two options here, or is there a kind of a third that we're discussing here?
It's a third.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not using proxy config, not directly at least. Let me find the get API parameter.
Yeah, is this the standard parameters reference from gateway, like from upstream gateway API?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It points to, I see the docs for gateway class, but I believe parameters ref exists on the individual gateway. In fact, I think John made that change a while back.
I remember John saying it and saying that like Istio does not currently have plans to implement it, but I remember that PR. Yeah.
Yeah. So in theory, I think that this should work. If not, then I'll need to make some changes to section gateway API. But I think it exists. I'll check when I get the chance. But yeah, it's completely standard gateway API stuff. In fact, if we wanted to do some, actually, we're already doing some in Istio. If you just change the like made the default config map be part of the actually, to some extent, the default config map is already the injection config, or not the config, the template that's in the injector config map. So want to make sure the semantics there aren't overly complex, but the pieces should be there to do whatever you want.
I think you need like 3 tiers basically, as much as you just said, not complicated. But there's no way someone can override the base one. Like that has all the details and nitty gritty that users shouldn't touch.
Yes.
So then they still have the need to overlay at the global and namespace level or gateway level.
Yes, correct. And so it's like I said, 3 tiers with nothing being able to override that base tier. So you can't change the image. Well, maybe you do want to change the image actually, but I don't know. That might be the problem. And I can figure out the details. Might put together a design doc for the details here. But yeah, there will be some keys that aren't overridable, and others that are. John, do you have another question?
Yeah, I think you might have mentioned this, but I want to verify. So in sidecars, it's a bit easier because there's only a pod. And so what are you customizing? It's obviously the pod gateway. There's multiple objects. Do we have a solution for how we'll handle that? I don't think it's probably that complicated. We just need to make sure we think about it.
Yeah, so I mentioned that in my head, at least, the way this would work is that the config map would have different keys for the different things being configured. So you'd have a key for the deployment spec, and then a key for the service spec, a key for maybe proxy config if you want second currency or something like that. And then reading each config map, we know what applies to what.
Okay, so we'd have like hard-coded set of like, say, 5 keys. That's deployment, service account, and whatever. Like you couldn't add an object, for example.
Correct.
Which I think is good. Well, I don't know. Is it good? I think it's probably good. I think
HPAs, potentially, we've had a lot of people ask about HPAs as part of the default gateway chart.
Yeah, do we allow adding it? I don't know. It becomes a slippery slope. Like then we're like a arbitrary config map. No, that's a security issue. It's like config map escalation to arbitrary resource. That's probably
right. Can't they just create their own HPA? Like
they can.
The stuff exists. So like I would limit it to what we generate. Like we only have keys for the resources that we generate to prevent the config map escalation security issue.
They can, but they have to have some sort of magic knowledge if they're using something like GitOps, because the gateway's deployment name doesn't exist yet in Git. So you've got to create an HPA that just knows what the gateway name is going to wind up being. So it's a little bit, I think we could improve it, but it's, I agree with John that we don't want to become Helm v4.
Unless we document the names, which we should.
Or wouldn't that be like templatable through a GitOps workflow or something like that?
No,
Yeah, I mean,
undocumented. If we don't document it, it's basically nobody knows what names will be. So I don't know if we document it. It was a debate some time ago.
Yeah, I feel documenting and then asking users to hard code the well-known names is like one approach, but if we have some capacity to like template it in GitOps, that feels more flexible.
That's Helm before. Istio Helm.
Costin, is that your what you want to say, or is it or do you have something else you
I
want to
think
add?
Lin is next. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I have a simple question. You guys probably all know the answer. So, how do I decide if I need some simple parameter? How do I decide if I just put it directly in my parameter ref, was I create a config map and use parameter ref to reference that?
Could you explain the question a bit more? So what are you deciding?
Like if I'm trying to put some simple configuration in the gateway, in the way, in the context of this, I think it's for the gateway deployments, whether it's Waypoint or Istio gateway. Do I always have to use config map as the reference within the parameter ref, or can I embed the parameter directly within the parameter ref?
No, so the parameters ref is an opaque reference because it's part of the gateway API spec. So basically for purposes of extensibility, it points to an implementation specific object. In Istio's case, that's going to be our config map or whatever for Istio specific configuration. So any keys and values we want to support in there, any kind of merge strategy we want to do with the gateway class, we can do any of that there. Things that are directly supported in Gateway API configuration, you wouldn't need to do that for. But that's kind of the purpose of the parameters ref, is to allow implementation specific extensibility. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so basically you have to have a customer kind of resource specific to your implementation, and then you use the refs to refer to that. There's no simple way. If you just need to add one parameter, you still have to have this customer resource. Yeah, thank you.
Unless Gateway API adds more fields. So right now, Gateway API has labels and annotations that you can just embed directly in the Gateway resource. If Gateway API adds more, then great, and we will support that. But this is an escape hatch, essentially. Users purchase a little bit of complexity by managing the config map themselves, but they can do a decent. They have almost all flexibility that they need to do whatever they want with their gateways. Meanwhile, as more common needs arise, we can make the case. Folks make the case from Gateway API to add more fields. But to be completely just for full transparency, like from a Gateway API perspective in that community, the existence of parameters ref makes it a pretty hard sell for what we need to add directly to Gateway complexity wise, especially with the fact that the pod spec seems to grow every single release. So there's not a lot of that doesn't necessarily want to bite off all of that ownership over time.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Costin, I think you are next.
Yes. So, Kit, while I fully agree with config maps and I know CRDs are controversial. One thing I want to mention, I played recently quite a bit with AI, Open API and all the other stuff, and there are some benefits to have CRDs or well-defined structured things for autocomplete in IDs, for having different things understand the structure and generate automatically and do all kind of magic. So I don't know if I haven't seen anything for config maps where they can be automatically understood. The content can be understood. I mean, yes, you read the documentation, but it's not so easy to generate compared with a CRD or Open API, which is well understood by other systems. So it may be worth exploring, having at least CRD-like definition, even if it's not a CRD. And I don't know if we can map it and get different tools to kind of understand it.
Yeah, one thing.
I've got some thoughts here, but John, go ahead.
Yeah, it kind of relates. So one thing is but we need to decide, and which will impact this, is okay, so today when we apply a sidecar, we have a list of templates that we run through Go template, and then we strategic merge them all onto the pod. Are the things that people are customizing templated, or are they just strategic merged? Because if they're templated, then it would be very hard to make a CRD, because it's not just like a pod object, it's a pod object after it's been templated.
My understanding from kit proposal is that it's a config, basically. It's something schematized that has, settings, explicit settings, not a template. Kit,
Well,
correct me if I'm wrong.
it is in the pod shape though, right? It's not like a different schema of settings. Like it's literally the pod.
Right.
YAML that has some part. Yeah, I mean, it can have an open API definition. That's my understanding.
So John makes a good point about templating, because, for example, if you wanted to have your own proxy image, but you wanted, I don't know, maybe you wanted it to have the version of the image, have the tag be automatically inserted based on the stuff in the sidecar injector. That's a use case for templating first. And to John's point, that will make that hard to live within a CRD, because now the CRD values are going to be like evaluated afterward, sort of post rendering, if you will. That's a really good point. I don't know how much we need. I'll take a look at it. That's an open question.
Exposing users to template, it's not pretty. I mean, I don't think especially our kind of templates, which are double complicated. Not only it's a template complicated, but our internal structure, they need to understand. We could do a limited, value substitution or something like that, but full templating in a user exposed configuration, I would be very worried about.
I think I agree with that. I don't think we want full templating, but something like version or some well-known Istio values. I need to take a look at the code more recently. It's been a little bit to see what exactly we template. Like there's a bunch of like proxy config values and things. Like if you just look at the gateway API templates today, like there's a lot of inputs and such that we put inside those templates. So we might want those to apply to the pod spec, or let users rely on those values, since we have them anyway when we're creating it. But go ahead.
One related point, don't forget, if we document the name of the deployment and we allow the user, I think we already kind of allow the user to create the deployment themselves. That's also something that is very easy for tools and for users to understand, because they know what a deployment look like. So they can create a deployment with boilerplates, and we can strategic merge or override it or do whatever we do during injection and that avoids the need to put templates, because if they can create a deployment, then no problem, because they can put anything, they can use whatever tools to generate the deployment, to maintain it, and we don't have to worry about it.
Oh, so yeah, so that exists today. Like this is meant to sort of bridge the gap to your point. Users have to maintain that. If you add a new listener on your gateway, you have to go and add a new port on your service. And that's the thing that users, when I mentioned manual management of their resources, that's where they balk. They say, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to think things are done, and then it certainly I didn't add a port, and now things are breaking. So this is meant to sort of be a middle ground between the two deployment options.
Yeah, but the line is very thin between I don't want to create add a new port to a service, and I want to learn to another way to add the port to a service in a config map, which does the same thing but differently.
Not quite. So like there are some things about the gateways that's static, some things are dynamic, right? They want Istio to take care of the dynamic bits, the ports, etc. But if they have a custom image they want, that's going to stay relatively static. Especially if that tag is, exactly. So if that tag, the point about templating is that if that tag is going to change, but it's going to change in such a way that Istio is managing it, why can't Istio just know what tag for my custom image to use based on what they're already templating? So that's probably a part of the design that we'll just need to keep in mind.
So if we treat it as an API and review each individual field, I think it's going to work very well. But
Yeah,
we need to be careful or not.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks. That's all here. I think next steps here, I might look to try to put together a design doc. And I might look at the APIs as well, like the Istio APIs repo to see if this. Well, I don't think we need a new proto API for this, but yeah, we'll just take a look. Thanks for the discussion, folks.
All right. Any last minute additions to the agenda this morning? Okay. Well, just a friendly ping. We've got all these docs up here that are still in review. If your name is next to them, please make sure that you're still hoping to get a review, that they're up to date and ready for others to look at them. And if it's not your name, please take a look and make some comments. We'll see probably most of you in 10 minutes at the ambient meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye,
Just
folks.
a heads up, people, the code freeze, we haven't decided exact date, but it's going to be in like roughly 2 weeks. So keep that in mind. See you all.
Bye.